The Crethean War Council gathered in the obsidian chamber, their chitinous plates clicking nervously against the stone floor. For the first time in 300 cycles, fear had entered their deliberations. They spoke in hushed tones, their compound eyes darting toward the shadows as if something might be listening. "We do not speak of her," High Commander Vexthor hissed, his mandibles trembling. "We speak only of the incident." The incident. That was what they called it now. As if reducing it to bureaucratic terminology could somehow diminish what had happened on Station Omega-7. As if calling it anything other than what it truly was, a massacre, a reckoning, a legend born in blood, could protect them from the truth. But the other species knew. Across 100 worlds, in 1,000 languages, they whispered the story. The humans had sent one of their own, and she had reminded the galaxy why Earth's children should never be underestimated. Her name was Captain Sarah Chun, though most who survived that night would never speak it aloud again. She had arrived on Omega-7 3 weeks before the incident, assigned to a diplomatic posting that everyone knew was a punishment detail. The station floated at the edge of contested space, a ramshackle collection of modules where 7 different species maintained an uneasy truce. Sarah was 43 standard years old, with iron-gray streaks in her black hair and a scar that ran from her left temple to her jaw. She had fought in the Proxima Wars, survived the siege of New Kyoto, and carried herself with the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing left to prove. Her service record was exemplary, decorated with commendations and medals that she kept locked in a drawer, never displayed. The posting to Omega-7 was meant to be her last assignment before retirement. A quiet end to a distinguished career. But the Crethians had other plans. They had been expanding aggressively for decades, swallowing smaller systems and enslaving their populations. The Galactic Council protested, but did nothing. The Crethians were powerful, their fleets numerous, their warriors fearsome. Most species had learned to look away when the Crethians arrived. Most species except humanity did on the night of the incident. Sarah had been in her quarters, reviewing supply manifests and dreaming of the small vineyard she planned to buy on Earth. The alert came at 0247 station time. Unauthorized docking on Base 7. Then the screams started. The Crethians had sent a raiding party, 50 warriors, the best of their shock troops. They moved through the civilian sectors with brutal efficiency, dragging families from their beds, killing anyone who resisted. They were after the Diluvian refugees who had sought sanctuary on the station, a species the Crethians claimed as property from a world they had conquered. Station security was overwhelmed in minutes. The Crethian warriors were 8 feet tall, armored in bioengineered carapaces that could deflect most energy weapons. Their claws could tear through steel. Their reflexes were superhuman by most species standards, and they hunted in perfect coordination, connected by pheromone-based communication that made them operate as a single, deadly organism. The station commander sent out a distress call and ordered all personnel to evacuate to the core sections. The message was clear: seal the bulkheads, contain the threat, wait for reinforcements that might arrive in days. Sarah Chun did not evacuate. She emerged from her quarters wearing her old combat suit, the one she had sworn she would never need again. In her hands, she carried a blade, not a modern plasma sword or a vibro knife, but an ancient katana, forged on Earth 3 centuries ago by a master swordsmith named Nakamura. It had been in her family for generations, passed down from warrior to warrior, and its edge had been honed to molecular sharpness. The Crethians found her in Corridor 9, standing alone in the flickering emergency lighting. Behind her were 37 civilians, humans, Diluvians, Serati, even a few Crethian dissidents who had fled their empire. They huddled in the medical bay's entrance, and Sarah stood between them and death. The lead warrior, a scarred veteran named Korax, tilted his head in what might have been amusement. Through his translator, his voice crackled. "Human, you hold a primitive metal stick. We are the Crethian Shock Corps. Move aside or be torn apart." Sarah's response was not words. It was movement. She crossed the 20-meter distance in 3 seconds. Her blade sang through the air, catching the emergency lights and throwing fragments of red illumination across the walls. Karax raised his clawed hand to block, confident in his armor's strength. The blade passed through his wrist, then his neck, then buried itself in the warrior behind him, all in a single fluid motion. 2 Creathians fell before their nervous systems could register what had happened. The corridor erupted in chaos. The Creathians attacked with their characteristic ferocity, but Sarah moved like water, like wind, like death itself. Her blade never stopped moving, each strike flowing into the next with perfect economy of motion. She ducked under slashing claws, sidestepped lunging attacks, and her sword found gaps in armor that should not have existed. The soft joints between plates, the vulnerable spots where biology and engineering met, blood, purple and viscous, painted the walls. Creathian warriors, who had terrorized a dozen worlds, fell to a single human with a 300-year-old sword. They tried to overwhelm her with numbers, but the corridor was narrow, limiting their advantage. They tried to flank her, but she moved with them, always keeping them in front, always protecting the civilians behind her. One warrior, thinking himself clever, launched himself from the ceiling. Sarah's blade swept up without her even looking, bisecting him in midair. Another tried to use his energy weapon at close range. She deflected his aim with her shoulder, let him fire into his own squadmate, then drove her blade through his thorax. The fight lasted 7 minutes. When it ended, 17 Creathian warriors lay dead in Corridor 9, and Sarah Chun stood among them, breathing heavily but uninjured, her blade dripping with alien blood. She did not stop. She could not stop. Through the night, Sarah moved through Omega 7 like a ghost, like vengeance incarnate. The remaining Creathians tried to regroup, to form defensive positions, to retreat to their ship. She found them in each location. In the cargo bays, in the engineering sections, in the docking ports, her blade did not miss. Not once. The Creathians began to panic, something they had not experienced in generations. They called for reinforcements, but their communications were jammed. Station security had recovered enough to at least manage that. They tried to fight smart, to use tactics, to set traps. But Sarah had spent 20 years fighting in humanity's wars. She had learned from the best, survived the worst, and had nothing left to fear. In the station's hydroponics bay, she killed 5 warriors who had taken hostages. In the zero-gravity cargo hold, she dispatched 8 more, adapting her techniques to weightlessness with fluid grace. In the reactor control room, the final 7 made their stand, their backs literally against the wall. Their leader, a commander named Esikethar, who had personally enslaved 3 worlds, held an energy weapon to a child's head, a young Diluvian girl with violet skin and terrified eyes. "Stop, human," Esikethar commanded. "Another step and the child dies." Sarah stopped. She looked at the child, at the warrior, at the blade in her hand. For a moment, time seemed to freeze. Then she spoke, her voice calm and cold. "You mistake me for someone who negotiates." She threw the katana. The blade spun through the air, perfect and precise, and buried itself in Esikethar's throat before he could pull the trigger. Sarah was already moving, closing the distance, pulling the sword free and turning in one motion. The remaining 6 warriors attacked as one. They all died within seconds of each other. When reinforcements finally arrived, a full Alliance battle group that had rushed at maximum speed, they found Omega 7's civilian population safe in the core sections. They found station security tentatively emerging from their defensive positions. And they found 50 Creathian raiders dead, their bodies scattered throughout the station in perfect testament to martial skill. They found Sarah Chun sitting in the corridor where it had all begun, cleaning her blade with a cloth, surrounded by the dead. She looked up at the Alliance soldiers with eyes that held no triumph, no satisfaction, only a deep, bone-weary exhaustion. "Captain Chun," the Alliance commander stammered. You killed all of them. Alone." "Someone had to," Sarah replied simply. She sheathed her blade and stood. "The civilians? All safe. Because of you." Sarah nodded. She walked past the soldiers, past the carnage, toward her quarters. She had reports to file, a station to help repair, and eventually, a vineyard waiting for her on Earth. Behind her, the Alliance soldiers stood in stunned silence, trying to comprehend what they were seeing. Trying to understand how one human, armed with nothing but an ancient blade and the refusal to surrender, had done what should have been impossible. In the days that followed, the story spread. The Creathian Empire demanded justice, but their demands rang hollow. Their warriors had violated sanctuary, murdered innocents, and been stopped by a single defender. The recordings from the station's security cameras were played in the Galactic Council, and 100 species watched in awe as Sarah Chun demonstrated why humanity had earned its place among the stars. The Creathians never spoke her name aloud after that night. It was superstition, perhaps, or fear, or something deeper, an acknowledgement that to name her was to remember their humiliation, their failure, their dead, but others spoke it. The Diluvians made her an honorary clan mother. The Sarati composed songs in her honor. Human children learned her story in schools, and human soldiers studied her techniques in military academies. Sarah Chun retired 6 months later, as planned. She bought her vineyard in Tuscany and lived quietly, tending her grapes and watching sunsets. Reporters occasionally found her, asking for interviews, but she declined them all. She had no interest in being a legend. "I did what needed to be done," she would say simply. Any soldier would have done the same. But that was not true, and everyone knew it. On that night, on Station Omega 7, something extraordinary had happened. One woman, with one blade, had changed the course of history and reminded the galaxy of an old Earth proverb. It is not the size of the dog in the fight, but the size of the fight in the dog. The Creathians learned that lesson at terrible cost. They never again raided a station with human presence. They never again underestimated Earth's children. And in their war councils, in their strategy sessions, in their darkest conversations about threats and enemies, they spoke of the incident on Omega 7, but they did not speak her name. They dared not. Her blade had not missed once that night, and in the end, that was all that mattered. The innocent were saved, the guilty were punished, and one retired soldier had written her final chapter with blood and steel and unflinching courage. Captain Sarah Chun, warrior of Earth, the woman whose name the Creathians feared to speak aloud, the woman who proved that sometimes one person with the will to act is enough to change everything.